Bethek the Panther, Krogwa in Warrior. We clearly have a lot to talk about.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Yeah, that's right, a Panther Loa. And that's not the only crazy rejected Rastakhan's Rumble card we're going to cover in this video. If you didn't know, Blizzard recently revealed some card designs that they initially tried out for Rastakhan's Rumble, but eventually got left on the cutting room floor in favor of other designs. And we have a lot of them to discuss in this video, so I'm going to talk about how good they might have been and how different they might have made Hearthstone. So let's go ahead and jump into these cards. Up first here, we have Bethek the Panther. So a lot to process right away. First up, that's not a panther in the artwork. Obviously, this is some temp art. But apparently, Shaman's Loa was going to be panthers originally. Beyond that, this card is just bonkers. 10 mana, 10/10, battle cry. If you've cast 10 spells, deal 10 damage to all enemies. So this becomes a really powerful board swing / finisher tool in a spell-based Shaman deck. And although it can take a while to get to 10 spells, if you think about Shaman and how it works, it's really not that difficult. Not only do they have cheap spells, but they have spells they like to play. They have spells that turn into other spells. Think about cards like Haunted Visions, for instance, which doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but would have made a ton of sense in a Bethek the Panther sort of environment. But needless to say, playing a 10/10 that almost always will clear your opponent's board outside of some death rattles or really high health minions, but also does 10 damage to the opposing hero's face. That is a ridiculous play. That is always going to be good. 99.99% of the time, that's something you love to do. It's just a universal board flip. It's a really good burst damage finisher. Not only that, it's a battle cry, so it actually works with Shudderwalk as well. Can you imagine doing this once, but then doing it again with Shudderwalk on top of all the other crazy battle cries that Shudderwalk has access to? Clearly, this put Shaman in this sort of spell / battle cry hybrid world, whereas the Krogwa Loa that we ended up finally getting in the real expansion leans far more heavily into just the spell side of things. And with the nerf to Shudderwalk, this card not seeing play, maybe Blizzard decided to dial back a little bit on the Battlecry synergies and push Shaman more in a spell direction. I don't really know if that's good or not just yet. I mean, clearly nerfing Shudderwalk was important, but I do feel like Shaman as a class right now is lacking a little bit of identity. That spell plan isn't really working out. Maybe it will with future expansions supporting it. But Bethek the Panther certainly would have been cool and strong. Maybe too good. I think you might have to dial this back to, like, 6 mana 6/6 that deals 6 to all, or maybe a 10 mana 6/6 that deals 6 to all, although I do certainly appreciate the symmetry. But this would just be really good on its own and crazy good in a defensive Shudderwalk deck. Probably even without infinite Shudderwalks, this still would be an amazing thing to feed into your Shudderwalk. So probably a good thing that we dodged this one, although I do want to like this card a lot, and I kind of almost wish it were in the game. So up next here, we have Krogwa the Frog for Warrior. Apparently, the Frogs were originally going to be the Warriors Loa before the Rhinos moved in. And as we can see here with this version of Krogwa, it's an 8 mana 7/7. Battlecry reads, draw the 3 highest cost minions from your deck. This clearly supports a big minion recruit style of play, which we've seen teased with Warrior in a few different directions and with a few different cards over the past few expansions. Particularly, this synergizes really nicely with the Boom Ship, where you play this on turn 8, you get 3 giant minions, and then on turn 9, you have a guaranteed activator for the Boom Ship. That would be an awesome play, and maybe that's what they were expecting Boom Ship to be all about, supporting it in a future expansion, but then somewhere along the way, Krogwa moved out of Warrior, and this card got lost, so they lost that, that Boom Ship support, and maybe that's why that card hasn't seen a lot of success. So it's interesting how well those two work together. But beyond that, I do think this card just supports that cool big warrior, recruit warrior style of play. And unfortunately, Akali the Rhino really hasn't taken off. Despite having Rush, I think it's a pretty slow card. And although Krogwa the Frog here would also be slow, it might have a big enough payoff with some of that support and in a control deck that can really run big greedy things that I suspect this version of Krogwa would probably better support Warrior than Akali the Rhino does at the moment. Now, of course, all those things could change, but I would have liked to have seen this card in Warrior. I think it would have opened up a really cool deck and helped empower a legendary spell with the Boom Ship that has fallen pretty far short of the mark so far. So to me, I would have preferred this pretty heavily over Akali the Rhino, which I haven't said for many of these cards that Blizzard has revealed as both alternate or rejected designs. So with Krogwa the Frog for Warrior in mind, take a look at this, the Shrine to Krogwa. And first things first, although this is called a shrine, this was really sort of the original interpretation of what we now know as spirits. So this was not going to be a Rumble Run card. That's confirmed by Blizzard. The shrines are in the Rastakhan's Rumble Run single player experience. The spirits are the collectible constructed Hearthstone cards. This was going to be a collectible constructed card. So spirits didn't all used to have the stealth aspect. They used to have different stats, still had varied costs, and typically couldn't attack, as we'll see in some future ones. But this is really the first version, the rejected version of spirits before spirits became spirits. They just used to be called shrines. I know that's a lot of explanation, but that's an important distinction because a lot of people are going to think this is just a shrine. So that said, the Shrine to Krogwa, or as we might now know it, the Spirit of the Frog is what it would be called. This is a 6 mana 2/8, so a big health total. It can't attack, but it reads, whenever you draw a minion, summon a copy of it. So in a way, this is a bit like the card Dollmaster Dorian, the legendary neutral minion, but instead of summoning a 1/1 copy, this summons a fully sized copy. So if you play Shrine to Krogwa and it lives, and then you play Krogwa the Frog, you are suddenly drawing 3 of your highest cost minions, and the Shrine to Krogwa will then summon copies of each of them. So you'll have 3 giant minions on board. So that's a ridiculous 1-2 punch, meaning this card is incredibly high friction and a high priority target to remove. So if you can find ways to keep this thing alive or draw cards in the same turn, the potential rewards are very, very high. And I love that interaction. That's really cool. It might be too good. I'm not sure. It's hard to envision it in play. This is, susceptible to removal and easy trades. So I think it'd be hard to work with like on turn 6. But, even if you do something like on turn 10, you have 4 spare mana to draw some cards, whether it's like Battle Rages or Slams, you might occasionally get that like free Lich King or free Ysera into play. And that's pretty good on a minion already. Now, admittedly, this minion can't attack, but remember you can do things like give it taunt. So there are still ways to utilize these stats, even if they're not trading immediately. And then, of course, if you think about recruit decks, this might not even be something you spend mana on. This might just get pulled out of deck from your Woe Cleaver, for instance, after the second attack of your Woe Cleaver, and then you're able to draw even more things with a ton of mana. So I think all of that fuses together in a pretty neat looking recruit warrior deck. I think I would have liked to see this. I don't think it's crazy overpowered, but it's promising and it supports a cool archetype for warrior, which I think warrior needs a little bit of deck diversity at the moment. It's really just kind of big armor up, odd warriors and occasional rush warrior, but those really don't ever seem to gain any ground. So I think this was a miss. I think compared to the Akali, the Rhino shrine that we got now, which is just really hard to use well, and Akali himself, I vastly prefer these 2 cards. I would have loved Shrine to Krogwa, perhaps in a spirit iteration, right, where it's a 0/3 that has stealth, but also the Krogwa the Frog version. I don't care if they're called rhinos. I think you still call them rhinos, but I like the designs and the mechanics on these 2 cards much more. So moving on, let's talk about the Shrine to Gonk. This, again, not a shrine, not a single player card. This was the original iteration of spirits as we know them. This time it says 3 mana 0/4 for Druid. It can't attack or be attacked. Now that's interesting. This one also can't be attacked. So I guess that was the original plan. Instead of giving things stealth for 1 turn, they were just going to leave these around on board. And outside of single target hard removal, these minions were just going to live for a very, very long time to minion trade so that you could get the long-term benefits of their effects. I think it was good that we stayed away from that and moved towards the stealth plan. That way you kind of get maybe 1 or 2 very likely activations, but it's not something that's kind of impossible for some decks to remove or play around. Moving into the Gonk Shrine here specifically, though, this one says your hero has Wind Fury. And that's a cool idea. I think I like that much better than the sort of value or resource-driven spirit of the Raptor that we have today, which draws you a card when you overkill a minion. In this case, you're really getting more tempo, more immediate impact. You're turning all of those weaker hero power attack synergy cards. you're turning those into double value. So Pounce suddenly gets way better because it's utilized twice in a turn instead of just once. So it's more about putting that hero power into influence right away on the board. Now, I do think there's a concern how this would interact with the modern current version of Gonk, because we already know Gonk the Raptor can kind of go crazy if you have multiple Gonks and you have multiple attacks stacking up. So this might just add to that chaos of the crazy OTK Gonk shenanigans that are possible. But in a vacuum, this card in itself, I like so much better than the Spirit of the Raptor version that we have now. I think it would really support what Druid's looking to do much more. Better support that hero power, make it faster, more active, more direct. I think all of those would be really good things. So up next here, let's talk about the Shrine to Shrivala. 6 mana 0/4 for Paladin. Your spells cast twice. Now, the real version of the Spirit for Paladin, of course, turns your spells into minions on board with the Spirit of the Tiger. Cast Blessing of Kings, you get a 4/4. Cast Spikered Seed, you get a 6/6. And I think it's debatable which of these would be better, right? Sometimes you don't want to overcommit to a single thing. So, you know, casting Blessing of Kings on a 1/1, that is nice that it turns it into a 9/9. Maybe that could give you more instant impact damage, but it's more susceptible to like a single target removal spell. Whereas a Blessing of Kings and a 4/4 sort of splits your resources a little bit, which can be advantageous in certain metas and in certain matchups. But there are some really scary, crazy things that can happen with a card like this. If it lives around on board for a turn or two, something like Blessed Champion, for instance, doubles the attack twice. It's not a linear effect. It's suddenly very scary because Leroy, if you did that, Leroy into Blessed Champion, that would turn into a 24 attack Leroy. So something like Shrine to Shrivala sitting on board for a long time would be terrifying. Now, of course, this minion does only have 4 health, so it might seem really susceptible, like it's never going to live around on board that long, you're never going to get value out of it. But remember, it can't actually be attacked, so it does take hard removal for this thing to go away. So any minion-based deck, like a zoo deck, an aggro deck that's relying on minions, is going to have trouble killing this. You know, control decks or spell-based decks, they'll still be able to handle it just fine, and it'll probably be a really wasted 6 mana. But there would be environments where this thing can go crazy with those big Blessed Champions or just really crazy Spike Ridge Steed value sorts of plays. Now, admittedly, it's very expensive, so sometimes it's going to have to happen on future turns. Wouldn't be able to play a lot of scary things on the same turn immediately with this to get tons of value. But nonetheless, despite some of those downsides and the risk of it dying so easily, I do think this could have found some homes in certain kinds of decks. Now, notably, I don't know that this is much better than the Shrine we have now. I think it's a bit more awkward in some ways. It's more high rolly, less consistent. So I actually like the Spirit of the Tiger that we have now more than this one. I think it's just more consistent, probably more fun in a lot of ways too, and not nearly so problematic. So I'm glad this design got rejected and they went with the design we have now. So now let's talk about the Shrine to Hyreek. Yet another Spirit rejected version here. Also can't attack or be attacked. And it reads, your spells cost health instead of mana. And cards like this are just incredibly frightening. Anytime you're able to spend, 29 mana in a single turn with a card like this, that's really, really scary. And really the only check on a card like this is the fact that it costs 5 mana, so you have to wait until turn 5 to pull off any sort of shenanigans. But once you get there, you can spend 29 mana if you had 29 mana worth of spells in hand. And although Warlock doesn't always have the best ways to utilize that directly, they're not just slamming fireballs and frostbolts at the opponent's face, they can still piece together some really crazy things. So a card like this to me just can't exist. It's way too easy to manipulate and just cheat out stupid things that shouldn't otherwise be possible. That much mana manipulation is terrible for Hearthstone, and it's going to lead to problems. So I don't see how Shrine to Hyreek could possibly exist in the game. What in the hell is going on out here? And then finally, one last rejected card here, the Grimoire of Service for Warlock. 9 mana spell that reads, choose a friendly minion, add a copy to your hand, deck, and battlefield. So we have here a combination, I guess, of Faceless Manipulator plus, I don't know, Gang Up, I suppose, where you're just putting all these different cards into each spot of the game. And I think that's really cool as far as an idea is concerned. Now, whether or not it's good is harder to say. I think it could be, right? Particularly if it's only costing health instead of mana, so you can play a lot of things all at once in combination with our previous card. This would be pretty ridiculous. But on its own in a vacuum, I think it's harder to use. You kind of have to be ahead on board to make this work for the board summon, right? Because it's choosing a friendly minion. So you're not going to play a 1-drop and then create a copy of it. That's not exciting. So you have to have something left over from an earlier turn to make this interesting. And then it's kind of mixed between, immediate tempo and then, slightly delayed resources in hand and then incredibly delayed resources in deck. But I'm sure there are some neat ways to create interactions that are cool. Just getting multiple Void Lords or multiple Doom Guards or something in order to summon them all at once and kill your opponent. I don't know exactly how you'd use this, but it does seem like there might be some way to use it. The challenge is just always going to be finding that 9 mana turn where everything lines up. So I think far more often than not, this would just be incredibly awkward and hard to utilize. So outside of some really specific combo or combo deck that's planning to use this, I just think the value is probably a little bit too delayed for the modern way Hearthstone is played, unless, of course, you're spending health on it and can cheat out tons of things all at once, and then it becomes really scary with cards like Leroy or something where there's just a ton of potential damage output. So for Grimoire of Service, a cool card in theory, but probably not a particularly good one in practice. And that wraps it up for these rejected Hearthstone cards for Rastakhan's Rumble. Very cool. I think it's nice that Blizzard shares some of these past design ideas. I'm going to be honest, some of these I don't know how they were ever envisioned as being viable, but we don't really know their design process, or maybe they designed things to be crazy powerful at the beginning intentionally to get ideas and creativity flowing and then pull them back. Some of these cards seem scary, but honestly, a few of them I thought fit well as well. Unlike the previous video we did where we talked about some of the alternate card designs, I thought a handful of these would have actually fit into the game. Others still kind of crazy, scary, good. But interesting to see the alternatives. I wonder if we see ideas like these show up in Hearthstone in future cards. That's something to keep an eye on. Now, that said, I'm curious what you guys think as well. So please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.